Welcome to Dark Diaries, where we uncover the chilling truths buried by time. Tonight, we journey to the antebellum South, not to a battlefield, but to a plantation's medical theater, where a terrifying experiment blurred the lines between science and nightmare. This is the story of a secret society, a desperate husband, and the enslaved man who became the subject of a horrifying procedure. On a June night in 1841, Colonel Edmund Thornhill summoned his household slaves to the drawing room of his Dallas County plantation and made an announcement that left them speechless. His wife, Virginia, who weighed over 400 pounds and could barely leave her chair, would be placed under the care of Silas, a dwarf slave he had purchased 3 months earlier for the specific sum of 400. What the household did not know, what would only be discovered decades later through documents found sealed in a Charleston vault, was that this was not an act of cruelty or madness. It was the first stage of a medical experiment, so disturbing that 7 people had already died in its development, and a secret society of wealthy Southerners had invested thousands of dollars waiting for its success. The Society of Medical Inquiry kept meticulous records, and those records reveal exactly what Colonel Thornhill believed would happen when he gave his dying wife to a slave whose blood he was convinced held the key to her salvation. Before we continue with the story of Thornhill Manor and the nightmare that unfolded behind its closed doors, make sure to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell. And tell us in the comments what state or city are you listening from. Now, let us descend into one of Alabama's darkest and most carefully hidden secrets. What happened in the weeks following that announcement would shock even the colonel himself, and the truth would be buried for generations. Colonel Edmund Thornhill returned to Dallas County in late February 1839, his left arm stiff from a Creek warrior's tomahawk that had shattered bone at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend 25 years prior. The wound had never properly healed, leaving him with a permanent reminder of Andrew Jackson's campaign and a morphine dependency that local physicians whispered about in private. At 52, Thornhill carried himself with the rigid bearing of military discipline, his gray eyes perpetually narrowed as if surveying enemy territory. His plantation, inherited from his father-in-law after the old man's convenient death from apoplexy in 1837, sprawled across 1,800 acres of prime cotton land along the Alabama River. The manor itself rose 3 stories from the red clay earth, a Greek revival structure with imposing white columns that seemed to judge anyone approaching up the long, oak-lined drive. Locals called it Thornhill Manor, though the property deeds still bore the name Ridgemont, a detail that would later prove significant. The house contained 23 rooms, most of which remained closed and unused, their furniture draped in white sheets like shrouded corpses. The basement, which extended far deeper than necessary for a typical root cellar, was strictly off-limits to all household slaves, except for 2 trusted men who never spoke of what they saw below. Dallas County in 1839 was a place of rigid hierarchies and unspoken rules. The county seat of Cahaba, situated at the confluence of the Alabama and Cahaba rivers, had briefly served as Alabama's state capital before repeated flooding forced the government to relocate to Montgomery. The displacement left Cahaba with a peculiar character, a town of faded grandeur populated by former legislators, ambitious planters, and the kind of men who viewed the frontier as a laboratory for social experimentation. The population numbered roughly 4,000, with slaves outnumbering free whites by nearly 3 to 1. Cotton was king, but beneath the Gentile veneer of plantation society, darker currents flowed. Virginia Thornhill, born Villa Catherine Ridgemont, had once been considered the belle of mobile society. Portraits from her youth showed a slender woman with delicate features and intelligent dark eyes. But by 1839, at 41 years of age, she had transformed into something that polite society struggled to acknowledge. Her condition, which modern medicine would recognize as a severe thyroid disorder, combined with edema, had caused her weight to balloon to an estimated 400 lb. She could no longer climb stairs without assistance. Her breathing, especially in Alabama's suffocating summer humidity, came in labored gasps that could be heard throughout the manor's first floor. What made Virgilia's situation particularly tragic was her mind, which remained as sharp as ever, trapped inside a body that betrayed her with every movement. She spent her days in a specially reinforced chair in the drawing room, surrounded by medical texts that she read voraciously, desperately searching for some explanation, some cure for her condition. Her husband's attitude toward her had transformed from distant politeness to something that servants whispered resembled clinical fascination. He watched her the way a naturalist might observe a specimen, taking notes in a leather journal he carried everywhere. The household staff consisted of 19 slaves, most of whom worked the fields and lived in the quarters behind the main house. But 6 house servants witnessed the peculiar dynamics of the Thornhill marriage firsthand. There was Esther, the head cook, a woman in her 50s whose scarred hands testified to years of labor. Her daughter, Celia, served as Vigilia's personal attendant, a position that required discretion and blind loyalty. 2 brothers, Marcus and Isaiah, maintained the grounds and served as the colonel's personal attendants, their faces carefully blank whenever they assisted him with his late-night trips to the basement. An older woman named Judith managed the household's daily operations with quiet efficiency, and a young girl named Penny, no more than 12, cleaned the upstairs rooms and was instructed never to enter the colonel's private study. Into this strange household in March 1839 came Silas. The slave auction in Mobile took place on a humid Tuesday morning when the air hung so heavy with moisture that men's shirt collars wilted before noon. Colonel Thornhill had traveled the 100 mi specifically for this auction, though he told no one true purpose. The auction house, a sturdy brick building near the docks where ships from Africa and the Caribbean unloaded their human cargo, reeked of unwashed bodies, fear, and the quiet desperation of people being sold like livestock. Silas stood on the auction block at precisely 1100, and the crowd's reaction was immediate. At 3 feet and 9 in tall, he was a dwarf, a condition that made him simultaneously fascinating and disturbing to the assembled planters. But what truly caught attention was his bearing. Unlike the other slaves who kept their eyes downcast, Silas met the gaze of potential buyers with an unsettling directness. His body, though diminutive, carried surprising strength. His arms were thick with muscle, disproportionate to his slight frame. His face, weathered beyond his 30-something years, bore a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from some past violence. The auctioneer, a red-faced man named Dempsey, seemed uncomfortable. "This here is Silas, brought up from the Creole auctions in New Orleans. Previous owner was a Dr. Beauchamp of Louisiana, deceased under unfortunate circumstances. Silas is literate, speaks French and English, has knowledge of medicinal plants, and a certain other specialized skills." That phrase, "other specialized skills," caused murmurs in the crowd. Several planters exchanged glances and walked away. In the slave economy of 1839, certain euphemisms carried dark implications. A literate slave was dangerous. One with specialized skills was potentially lethal. But Colonel Thornhill stepped forward, his face betraying no emotion. "What exactly are these specialized skills, Mr. Dempsey?" The auctioneer leaned down, lowering his voice, though several others could still hear. "The previous owner used him for breeding purposes. Colonel claims he sired 17 children, all healthy, all valuable. Also says he has knowledge of anatomy and medical procedures, assisted the doctor in his practice. Some question about the nature of that practice, which is why we are selling him cheap." Thornhill's eyes narrowed with interest. "How cheap?" "400, sir. Half what you would pay for a prime field hand, considering his physical limitations." The bidding was brief. A planter from Montgomery offered 300. Another went to 350. But when Thornhill called out 400 in a voice that bade no competition, the others fell silent. Money changed hands, papers were signed, and by noon, Silas was shackled in the back of Thornhill's wagon, beginning the long journey to Dallas County. They traveled for 3 days, stopping at roadside taverns, where Silas remained chained in the wagon bed. Thornhill barely spoke to his new acquisition, except to offer water and hard biscuits. But on the second night, camped beside the road under a moon that turned the Alabama landscape silver and strange, the colonel finally broke his silence. "Can you truly read, Silas?" "Yes, master." The voice was deep, incongruous, coming from such a small frame, with an accent that suggested education beyond what any slave should possess. "And your knowledge of medicine. Is that true, or was Dempsey inflating your value?" Silas turned his head, meeting Thornhill's gaze in the firelight. "Dr. Beauchamp trained me for 8 years, master. He believed that small hands were advantageous for certain delicate procedures. I assisted in over 200 surgeries before his death. And what caused his death? Yellow fever, master. Same epidemic that killed half of New Orleans in 37. Thornhill studied him for a long moment. You are lying. I checked the death records before I came to Mobile. Henry Beauchamp died of arsenic poisoning. The inquest could not determine if it was accidental or murder. You were sold by his widow specifically to remove you from New Orleans before certain questions could be asked. Silos said nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been respect for the colonel's thoroughness, or perhaps recognition of a kindred calculating intelligence. I do not care what happened in New Orleans, Thornhill continued. That is the past. What matters is what you can do for me. I have work that requires discretion, intelligence, and a strong stomach. Do you possess those qualities? What kind of work, master? Medical work, experimental in nature. You will assist me, and in return, you will have a private room in the manor, better food than field slaves, and access to my medical library. You will also have certain privileges that others do not enjoy, but you will speak to no one about what we do. If you betray my confidence, your death will be slow and creative. Do we understand each other? Yes, master. Good. Thornhill leaned back, his damaged arm cradled against his chest. When we arrive at the manor, you will meet my wife. You will be respectful, obedient, and attentive to her needs. She suffers from a condition that conventional medicine cannot cure. I intend to try unconventional methods. They arrived at Thornhill Manor on a Thursday afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon and the air crackled with pre-storm electricity. The household slaves came out to meet the wagon, their faces carefully neutral as they regarded the new arrival. Silas, now unchained but acutely aware that escape into the surrounding countryside would be suicidal for someone of his distinctive appearance, climbed down and stood waiting for instructions. Vigilia Thornhill received him in the drawing room, seated in her reinforced chair near the window where afternoon light illuminated her with cruel clarity. She wore a dress of deep green silk that had been specially constructed to accommodate her size, and her hair, still thick and dark despite her age, was arranged in an elaborate style that suggested vanity had not entirely died within her. "So this is the one," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious. She studied Silas with the same clinical detachment her husband had displayed. "Come closer. Let me see you properly." Silas obeyed, stepping into the light. At his height, he was almost at eye level with Vigilia, despite her seated position. She reached out and took his chin in her hand, turning his face side to side, examining him like a horse buyer, checking teeth. "Edmund says, you have medical knowledge." "Yes, mistress." "And breeding capabilities." Her tone was matter-of-fact, discussing him as one might discuss livestock genetics. 17 children, I am told, all healthy. So I have been told, mistress. I never met most of them. They were sold shortly after birth. Something flickered across Vigilia's face, an emotion too quick to identify. Of course they were. That is the nature of our peculiar institution, is it not? But we are not interested in children, Silos. We have other goals. My husband has explained nothing to you, I assume. No, mistress. Typical Edmund. He enjoys his mysteries. She released his chin and sat back. Her breathing labored from even that small exertion. I am dying, Silos. Slowly, yes, but inevitably. This body is destroying itself, growing larger and weaker with each passing month. Conventional doctors offer leeches and mercury, prayer and resignation. But my husband and I believe there are other possibilities. Older knowledge, experimental procedures, methods that the medical establishment considers unethical or even heretical. Colonel Thornhill entered the room, his boots clicking on the polished floor. That is enough for now, Vilia. Silas needs to see his quarters and understand his duties before we discuss theory. Theory. Vigilia laughed, a sound that dissolved into coughing. Is that what we are calling it, Edmund? How delightfully academic. Thornhill's jaw tightened. Celia, show Silas to the small room off the kitchen. Off, he will take his meals with the house staff and attend me in my study each morning at 600 sharp. Silas, you are dismissed. But as Silas followed Celia out, he heard Vigilia's voice. Lower, now speaking to her husband. He is perfect, Edmund. Exactly what we need. When do we begin? Soon, my dear, very soon. The room Silas was given had once been a pantry, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small table it now contained. But it had a lock on the inside, a luxury no field slave would ever know, and a window that overlooked the kitchen garden. More importantly, it was near the basement door, and in the nights that followed, Silas would lie awake listening to sounds that drifted up from below. Footsteps, muffled voices, and occasionally a sound that might have been crying or might have been something else entirely. His duties began simply enough. Each morning he attended Conal Thornhill in the study, a room lined with bookshelves containing volumes on medicine, anatomy, natural philosophy, and subjects more obscure. Thornhill would dictate notes while Silas wrote in a clear hand, documenting observations about Vigilia's condition, her weight measured on a special scale brought from Mobile, her food intake carefully monitored, her breathing patterns, the swelling in her ankles, the quality of her sleep. But there were other notebooks, too, older ones that Thornhill sometimes consulted, but never let Silas touch. Their leather covers were stained with substances that might have been ink or might have been blood, and the glimpses Silas caught of their contents showed anatomical drawings of a precision and detail that suggested first-hand observation of a disturbing nature. "You are wondering about my methods," Thornhill said one morning, catching Silas staring at one of the closed notebooks. "That is natural. Curiosity is the mark of intelligence. But you must understand something, Silas. Medicine, as it is currently practiced, is barbaric. Leeches and laudanum, prayer and ignorance. The human body is a machine. Complex, yes, but ultimately understandable. The ancients knew this. The Egyptians, the Greeks, they studied anatomy through direct observation. But then came the dark ages of Christian morality, where touching a corpse was sin and knowledge was heresy." He pulled down one of the older volumes, its pages yellowed with age. "There are men in Europe, even now, who understand that progress requires sacrifice, who recognize that some knowledge can only be gained through methods that society considers immoral. I studied with one such man in Charleston before the war, Dr. Nathaniel Rodold, Constance's father. He taught me that the boundaries between life and death, health and disease are more fluid than we imagine. That with the right techniques, the right understanding, we can transfer vitality from one vessel to another." Silas kept his face carefully neutral. "Transfer vitality, master. Have you never wondered why some people thrive while others waste away? Why a child can survive injuries that would kill an adult, or why some bloodlines seem cursed with illness while others flourish? It is not God's will, Silas. It is biology, and biology can be manipulated." Over the following weeks, Silas learned the true nature of his duties. He was to assist in procedures conducted in the basement laboratory, a space that had been carefully constructed during the house's renovation in 1837. The room was large, surprisingly well lit by multiple oil lamps, and equipped with a level of medical sophistication that would have impressed any surgeon of the era. There were examination tables with leather restraints, cabinets containing surgical instruments of gleaming steel, glass containers holding specimens preserved in alcohol, and an entire wall of detailed anatomical charts. But it was the other equipment that revealed the true purpose of this space: strange machines of brass and wood designed to measure and manipulate the human body in ways that had no legitimate medical application. Devices for bloodletting that could drain a person to the point of death, and then theoretically reverse the process. Complicated systems of tubes and pumps that suggested transfusion, or something even more disturbing. "We begin with simple observation," Thornhill explained during Silas's first visit to the laboratory. "We must establish baseline measurements for both subjects before we can attempt any transfer." "Both subjects, master." Thornhill smiled, an expression that never reached his eyes. "You do not think this is only about my wife, do you?" "No, Silas. This is about testing a theory. If vitality can be transferred, if the life force, the essential energy that some call the humerus and others call the vital spirit, if that can be moved from one body to another, then we must have a donor and a recipient. Vilja will be the recipient. You, my intelligent friend, are the donor." The room seemed to grow colder. Silas kept his voice steady. "You mean to kill me, master?" "Kill you? No, that would be wasteful. The process, if it works, should not be fatal to either party." Rottled's research suggested that vitality could be shared, transferred in measured amounts like blood in a transfusion. "You will be weakened certainly, but you will recover and the process can be repeated. Think of it as donating blood, but instead of blood, we are transferring something more fundamental. And if it does not work, Then we will have learned something valuable, and we will try again with modifications. Science, Silas, is built on failure. Each unsuccessful attempt brings us closer to success. What Thornhill did not say, what Silas understood with cold clarity, was that modifications likely meant testing on other subjects. And suddenly the question that had been haunting him since Mobile gained terrible significance. What happened to the 7 other dwarfs who had disappeared from auction records across the deep south? That night, alone in his small room, Silas made a decision. He would play along, learn everything he could about Thornhill's experiments and the network that supported them, and he would find a way to survive. He had survived Dr. Beauchamp's medical practice in New Orleans, survived long enough to ensure the man died choking on his own vomit, after Silas had carefully docked his evening cognac with the right combination of emetics and toxins. He would survive this too. But as he lay in the darkness, listening to footsteps descending to the basement laboratory, listening to Vigilia's labored breathing as she was helped down the stairs by Celia and Marcus, Silas wondered how many others had lain in similar rooms in similar plantations across the South, making similar plans that never came to fruition. The experiments were about to begin, and with them a descent into horror that would make Dr. Bam's crime seem almost merciful by comparison. 3 weeks after Silas's arrival, a visitor came to Thornhill Manor. Constance Rodold arrived in an elegant black carriage on a Wednesday morning, when the smell of magnolia blossoms hung thick in the air. At 57, Rodold was tall and rail-thin, with a beard gone nearly white, and eyes of such pale blue they seemed almost colorless. He carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to deference, and the household slaves instinctively lowered their gaze when he passed. Silas, observing from the kitchen window as he helped Esther prepare the noon meal, noted the wooden cases that Marcus and Isaiah carefully unloaded from the carriage. The cases were heavy, requiring both men to carry each one, and they bore no markings or labels. They were taken directly to the basement laboratory. "That is the devil himself," Esther whispered, her hands never stopping their work chopping vegetables. "Been coming here since before Miss Vigilia got sick. Some say he is the one made her sick in the first place with his potions and powders." "Why would he do that?" Silas asked, keeping his tone casual. Esther glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone for his experiments. "That is what folks say. She was not always big like this. Got sick after the colonel came back from Charleston after he spent those 3 months studying with Dr. Ruddle's father. Came back with ideas, with equipment, with ambitions. Miss Vigilia, she went along with it at first. Thought they could cure anything, make themselves immortal or some such foolishness, but then she started changing, swelling up, getting weaker. Now she cannot even leave that chair most days. And the doctor still comes, still brings his equipment, still goes down to that basement with the colonel. And other men come too in the night when respectable folk are sleeping. I have seen their carriages, fine carriages from Mobile and Montgomery, even from as far as Charleston. They come, they go down to the basement, they leave before dawn. And sometimes Silas, sometimes people disappear. Slaves mostly, bought at auction, brought here, and then gone. The colonel says he sold them, sent them to other plantations. But Marcus, he has heard things, sounds coming from below. That ain't the sounds of doctoring." Before Silas could respond, Celia entered the kitchen, her face carefully blank. "Silas, the colonel wants you in the study." Now, the study smelled of tobacco and old leather. Colonel Thornyhill stood by the window, Dr. Rodold beside him, both men turning as Silas entered. Rodold's pale eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was almost physical. "So this is the specimen," Rodold said, circling Silas like a buyer at an auction. "Excellent musculature for his size. The previous owner trained him well. And you say he is literate. Genuinely literate, not just trained to recognize a few words." "Test him yourself," Thornhill replied. Rodold pulled a medical text from the shelf, opened it to a random page, and thrust it at Silas. "Read this passage out loud." Silas read a dense paragraph about the treatment of suriting wounds, pronouncing even the Latin terminology correctly. Rodold's eyebrows rose. "Remarkable. And he assisted in surgeries, you said, according to his previous owner's records." "Yes, over 200 procedures. Even more remarkable. Tell me, Silas, do you understand what we are attempting here?" Silas chose his words carefully. The master says you believe vitality can be transferred between individuals, doctor, that the life force is not fixed but can be manipulated through medical intervention. Rodold smiled, an expression that transformed his severe face into something almost animated. He understands. Edmund, this is perfect. Not just a donor, but an intelligent observer who can articulate his experience during the process. This could provide invaluable data. That was my thought. Thornhill agreed. If the procedure causes discomfort or sensation that might indicate efficacy, Silas can describe it in detail. Assuming he remains conscious, the pain might be considerable. Rudolf studied Silas with renewed interest. How is your pain tolerance, boy? Can you maintain composure under duress? I have been a slave for 31 years, doctor. I have learned to endure. Good, because what we are about to do has never been successfully completed. Oh, there have been attempts, experiments conducted by the Society of Medical Inquiry going back decades. My father was among the founding members and his research forms the basis for our current approach. But the technique requires precision, timing, and a willingness to push beyond the boundaries that squeamish men call ethics. He walked to Thornhill's desk and unrolled a large anatomical chart covered in handwritten notes and diagrams. Silas, despite himself, moved closer to see. The chart depicted two human figures connected by an elaborate system of tubes and needles. Notes in meticulous handwriting described a process that seemed to combine bloodletting, transfusion, and something more esoteric involving humoral balance and vital essence transfer. The theoretical basis drew from ancient medicine, medieval alchemy, and what seemed to be original research conducted on subjects whose consent was clearly never considered. We begin with bloodletting. Routledge explained, his finger tracing the diagram, but not the barbaric leeching that common physicians employ. Precise measurement, exact quantities calculated based on body weight and humoral composition. We drain blood from the donor here and here. He pointed to marked locations on the diagram's arms and legs. Simultaneously, we administer a tonic to the recipient, a preparation of my own design containing mercury, belladonna, and certain herbs known to indigenous peoples of the Americas. This tonic opens what I call the vital channels, making the recipient's body receptive to new vitality. Then comes the transfer. Using graduated transfusion, we introduce the donor's blood into the recipient's system. But it is not merely blood we are transferring. The tonic and the ritual timing conducted according to lunar phases and humoral correspondences allow us to transfer something more essential. Call it life force. Call it vital energy. Call it what you will. The ancients understood that some people possess concentrated vitality and that this vitality can be harvested. Silas kept his voice neutral and the donor survives this process. In theory, yes. Though I will not lie to you, boy. The 7 previous attempts had mixed results. 3 subjects died during the procedure itself. Cardiac failure brought on by excessive blood loss. 2 survived but were left in a severely weakened state, useless for further experimentation. They were disposed of. 1 subject developed a violent fever and died 3 days after the procedure. And 1, most interesting, seemed to survive relatively intact, but developed a peculiar madness, claiming he could feel pieces of himself living inside the recipient. He had to be put down before he became dangerous. Encouraging odds, Silas said dryly, earning sharp looks from both men. Rodold laughed. He has spirit. I like that. Spirit means strong vitality. Edmund, he will make an excellent donor, but we must be careful. The Society has invested considerable resources in this research, and they expect results. Success here could lead to breakthroughs that will transform medicine. Imagine a world where the young and vital could extend the lives of the wealthy and wise, where senators and presidents need not fear age or disease, because they have access to renewal through controlled transfer. The implications for society are staggering. When do you wish to proceed? Thornhill asked. The new moon is in 6 days. That provides optimal conditions according to the humoral calendar. We will need the recipient prepared, the donor prepared in absolute privacy. No household slaves can know the exact timing or witness the procedure itself. Can you ensure discretion? Marcus and Isaiah are loyal. They will guard the doors and ensure no one interrupts. And your wife, is she prepared? Vigilia understands what we are attempting. She is eager to begin. Ruddle nodded slowly. Then we proceed in 6 days. I will return the day before with the final equipment and tonics. In the meantime, Edmund, Keep the donor wealthed and healthy. We need him at peak vitality for the transfer to have maximum effect. Any weakness or illness in him could compromise the entire procedure. As Silas was dismissed and returned to the kitchen, his mind raced 6 days. He had 6 days to decide whether to attempt escape, knowing that as a dwarf slave running through rural Alabama, he would be captured within hours, or to submit to a procedure that had a 7/8 failure rate resulting in death or worse. But there was a third option, one that Dr. Beauchamp had taught him through bitter experience. If you cannot escape and you cannot refuse, then you manipulate the situation to your advantage. You watch, you learn, you wait for the moment when your captor's confidence makes them careless, and then you strike. That night, Silas began preparing. His room contained little, but what he had was enough. A small knife used for cutting vegetables smuggled from the kitchen. A bottle of laudanum he had palmed from Thornhill's study when the colonel's attention was elsewhere. And most importantly, his mind, which held knowledge that Beauchamp had imparted during 8 years of training, knowledge of anatomy and toxicology that most physicians never learned. He also began listening more carefully to the house, mapping its rhythms and secrets. The basement laboratory could be reached by 2 routes: the obvious door off the kitchen and a second entrance from the colonel's ground floor bedroom, a door concealed behind a bookshelf. The laboratory itself had no windows, but the ventilation system necessary to remove the fumes from chemical experiments led to a grating on the north side of the house. And most tellingly, Silas discovered that he was not the only one making preparations. On the 3rd night before the scheduled procedure, he woke to sounds of movement in the house. Creeping to his door, he peered out to see Celia descending to the basement carrying fresh linens. An hour later, she emerged looking shaken, her hands trembling as she climbed back to the upper floor. The next morning, Silas found a moment alone with her in the wash house. "You saw something," he said quietly. "Last night." Celia's eyes widened with fear. "I cannot talk about it. The colonel will have me whipped if I say anything. I am going to be in that basement in 3 days, Celia. Whatever you saw, I need to know." She glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then leaned close. "There are cages down there, Silas. Iron cages built into the walls, and in one of them there is a man, or what is left of a man. He cannot speak, cannot do anything but stare. His skin is wrong, covered in marks like he has been cut open and sewn back up dozens of times. The colonel says he is a failed experiment, kept alive for observation. When I brought the linens, Dr. Untold was measuring him, writing notes about how long he had survived in his current state. How long has he been there? I do not know. Months at least, maybe longer. Silas, they are going to do worse to you. I have heard them talking. This is not about curing Miss Vigilia. This is about something else. Something they call the ultimate experiment. They talk about it like preachers talk about salvation. Like it is the most important thing in the world, and they do not care who dies to achieve it." Silas absorbed this information, feeling his options narrow further. If there was already a subject being kept in the basement, a failed experiment, then Thornhill and Untold had gone far beyond theoretical research. They were conducting systematic human experimentation, and the Society of Medical Inquiry, whatever that organization was, supported and funded their work. "Celia, if something happens to me, if the procedure goes wrong, you need to tell people what you have seen. Tell the other slaves. Tell anyone who will listen." She shook her head frantically. "No one will believe a slave's word against the colonel's. Even if they did, the society would protect him. They have members in every major city in the South, judges and politicians and wealthy men. Marcus says they are like the Freemasons, but worse. A secret brotherhood devoted to this twisted medical research. They protect each other, cover up scandals, make evidence disappear. If I talk, I will just disappear too." She was right, and Silas knew it. Whatever happened in that basement in 3 days, the truth would be buried along with any victims. Unless he could find a way, not just to survive, but to expose what was happening in a way that could not be ignored or suppressed. The problem was, he had no idea how to do that. Not yet. The day of the procedure dawned gray and oppressive, the air so thick with humidity that breathing felt like drowning. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon but never came closer. As if even the weather was holding its breath, Silas was awakened before dawn by Marcus, who silently escorted him to the basement laboratory. The space had been transformed. Additional lamps created a harsh, almost operating theater brightness. The examination tables, 2 of them now, were positioned side by side with barely 3 feet between them. A complex apparatus of brass tubes, glass reservoirs, and rubber hoses connected the tables, the whole contraption looking like some nightmarish musical instrument designed by a madman. Dr. Untold was already present, arranging surgical instruments on a cloth-covered tray. He wore a leather apron stained with old blood, and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms crisscrossed with old scars. Colonel Thornhill stood nearby, reviewing handwritten notes in one of his leather-bound journals. Our donor arrives," Rutledge said without looking up. "Strip to the waist and lie on the table to the left. Marcus, secure him." Silas obeyed, knowing resistance was pointless. The leather restraints were fastened around his wrists, ankles, and across his chest, tight enough to prevent movement, but not so tight as to cut off circulation. Yet Vigilia was brought down 20 minutes later, supported between Celia and Isaiah. Her breathing labored from the exertion of descending the stairs. She wore a simple white cotton gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her face held an expression that Silas could not quite decipher. It was not fear, not exactly. It was anticipation mixed with something darker, a hunger that made her eyes glitter in the lamplight. At last, she whispered as they helped her onto the second table. "Edmund, are you certain this will work?" "As certain as science allows, my dear doctor. Untold has refined the procedure based on previous attempts. Your chances of success are significantly improved, and his chances." She glanced at Silas with what might have been pity, or might have been the way a diner looks at a meal. "Adequate," Untold said dismissively. "We have calculated the blood volume carefully. He should survive, though he will be weakened for some weeks afterward." Should survive. The casual nature of the assessment made Silas's blood run cold, but he kept his face impassive. He had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged cruelty. Untold began his preparations with methodical precision. First, he administered a dose of labdanum to both subjects, enough to dull pain without inducing unconsciousness. Silas felt the familiar warmth spreading through his limbs, the slight detachment that came with the drug. Then came a series of measurements: heart rate, breathing, body temperature taken with a mercury thermometer. "His vitals are excellent," Untold announced. "Pulse strong and steady at 68 beats per minute. The donor is in optimal condition, and the recipient, Thornhill, who had been examining Vigilia, consulted his notes. Pulse elevated at 92, breathing labored but stable. She is ready. Then we begin. Marcus, Isaiah, take your positions at the doors. No one enters under any circumstances. If anyone attempts to interrupt, you have permission to use whatever force is necessary." The 2 slaves nodded and departed, their footsteps echoing on the stairs. Celia was dismissed as well, leaving only the 3 principals and their unwilling subject in the laboratory's harsh light. Untold opened one of the wooden cases he had brought, revealing rows of glass vials containing liquids of various colors. He selected 3 and began mixing them in a graduated beaker, his movements precise and practiced. The resulting liquid was a deep amber color that seemed to glow in the lamplight. "The tonic," he explained, though Silas suspected he was speaking more for his own satisfaction than for any educational purpose. 40 grains of mercury in suspended solution, extract of belladonna, carefully measured to expand the vital channels without inducing fatal arrhythmia, and a tincture derived from a plant the Cherokee call ghostweed, which opens the boundary between physical and vital forces. He approached Vigilia first, holding the beaker to her lips. "Drink it all, my dear. Quickly now, before the mercury settles." Vigilia drank without hesitation, grimacing at what must have been a bitter taste. Within moments her pupils began to dilate, growing so large that her eyes looked almost black. Her breathing, already labored, became rapid and shallow. "Excellent response," Untold noted, checking his pocket watch. "The tonic is taking effect. Now we prepare the donor." He moved to Silas's table, selecting a scalpel from his tray of instruments. "I am going to make 4 incisions, 1 in each limb, positioned over major blood vessels. The cuts will be deep enough to allow significant blood flow, but controlled enough to prevent rapid exsanguination. You will feel pain despite the laudanum. Do you understand?" "Yes." Silas managed his mouth dry. "Good. Try not to thrash. The restraints will hold you, but excessive movement could cause the incisions to tear irregularly, which would complicate the procedure. The first cut in the crook of Silas's left arm felt like a line of fire drawn across his skin. Despite the lordom, the pain was immediate and intense. He bit down hard, refusing to cry out. The second cut in his right arm was worse, because he knew it was coming. Blood flowed freely from both wounds, channeled by metal guides into the glass reservoirs of Rodeldig's apparatus. The leg incisions were deeper, targeting the femoral vessels, and even through the Lord's haze, Silas felt consciousness beginning to slip. The laboratory seemed to darken at the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. Heart rate dropping, Thornhill reported, his fingers on Silas's wrist, 625854. As expected, we will let him drain until we reach 48, then begin the transfusion. Edmund, prepare the recipient. Through dimming vision, Silas watched as Thornhill made similar incisions in Villia's arms, though hers were shallower, designed to receive rather than release. She gasped as the blade cut her skin, but the sound carried a note almost of pleasure. The tonic is working beautifully, Routledge murmured, examining Vigilia's dilated pupils and taking her pulse. Her vital channels are wide open. She will receive the transfer with maximum efficiency. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting unpredictably. Silas felt his blood leaving his body, felt the weakness spreading through his limbs like cold water. The glass reservoirs filled with dark red liquid measured and monitored by Routledge with obsessive precision. 48 beats per minute, Thornhill announced. We have reached the threshold. Begin transfusion, Routledge commanded. The apparatus was adjusted, valves turned, and Silas's blood began flowing through the brass tubes toward Virgilia's table. But it was not a simple transfusion. The blood passed through a series of chambers containing substances Silas could not identify. Treatments that changed its color from dark red to something lighter, almost luminous. The purification process removes the donor's individual essence. Routledge explained more to himself than anyone else. What remains is pure vitality, untainted by the donor's identity. This allows the recipient to absorb the life force without rejection. Vigilia moaned as the treated blood entered her veins, her back arching against the restraints. Her breathing accelerated further, becoming almost hyperventilation. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the basement's cool temperature. Edmund, her heart rate 112 rising to 121/28. Perfect. The integration is occurring. Her body recognizes the vitality and draws it in. Continue the flow. We need to transfer at least 3 pints for measurable effect. Silas watched through gray-edged vision as his blood, his life flowed into Villia's body. He tried to speak to protest, but his tongue felt thick and useless. The laboratory spun slowly, and he became aware of a sound he could not immediately identify. It was rhythmic, insistent, familiar, his own heartbeat slowing with each pulse 40 beats per minute. 35:30. Dr. Thornhill said, his voice carrying a note of alarm. The donor is approaching critical threshold. Just a bit more. We are so close to the required volume. His lips are turning blue. Another half pint, Edmund. We need another half pint for the procedure to be complete. He is dying. Then he dies for the advancement of science. Another 30 seconds. That is all I need. But Thornhill was already moving, his hands fumbling with the apparatus's valves. No, this is enough. We stop now or we lose him entirely, and then we have no donor for future procedures. Routledge's face twisted with frustration, but he did not argue. The flow was stopped, the tubes disconnected. Silas felt bandages being wrapped around his limbs, pressure applied to the incisions. Someone, Thornhill, was forcing liquid between his lips, something sweet and thick that might have been honey water or some medicinal preparation. His heart rate is stabilizing. Thornhill said 42 beats, 46:50. He is going to survive. Then we wait. Routledge said, his attention already shifted entirely to Vigilia. Now we observe the recipient and document the effects. Vigilia lay on her table, eyes closed, breathing gradually, slowing from its manic pace. Her skin, which had been pale and waxy for months, showed a hint of color. Her chest rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed less labored than before. Edmund, she whispered, I feel something. It is like warmth spreading through my body, like spring water flowing through frozen ground. I feel stronger, I feel alive. Routledge leaned over her, examining her eyes, taking her pulse, making rapid notes in his journal. Remarkable. Her pulse is stabilizing at 86, down from 128. Respiration is deeper and more regular. The integration appears successful. How long before we know if the effects are permanent? Thornhill asked. Hours at minimum, days more likely. She will need to be observed constantly. Any adverse reactions in the first 24 hours could indicate rejection, which would require immediate intervention. But Edmund, if this works, if she shows sustained improvement, then we will have achieved what no physician in history has accomplished. We will have successfully transferred life force from one human to another. They continued their observations, taking measurements, making notes while Silas lay on his table, barely conscious, blood-soaked bandages wrapped around his limbs. No one bothered to check on him further once his heart rate stabilized. He was the donor, the source, and now that he had served his purpose, he was simply maintenance to be kept alive for potential future use. Through the fog of weakness and lingering laudanum, Silas listened to them celebrate their success. He listened to Virgilia describe the sensations flowing through her body, the feeling of renewed vitality, the hope that she might actually recover. He listened to Thornhill and Rodold plan future procedures, discussing optimal intervals between sessions, calculating how much blood could be safely taken without permanently damaging the donor. And he began to understand something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This was never about curing Virgilia. This was about testing a methodology that could be sold to the wealthy and powerful. Imagine a plantation owner drawing vitality from his youngest, healthiest slaves to extend his own life. Imagine senators and industrialists maintaining youth and vigor by harvesting life force from carefully selected donors. The implications, as Rodold had said, were staggering and monstrous. Hours passed. Eventually, Marcus and Isaiah returned to carry Silas back to his room, dumping him on the narrow bed with minimal care. Esther appeared with broth and bandages, her face carefully blank as she tended to his wounds. "Drink this," she commanded, holding a cup to his lips. "You have lost too much blood. You need to drink as much as you can. Build your strength back." "The man in the cage," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "How long has he been there?" Esther's hand stilled momentarily. 9 months near as I can tell. He was not always like that. When they first brought him down, he could still talk, still beg. Now he just stares. They keep him alive with tubes and force feeding, keep him breathing so they can study what their experiments did to him. What did they do? Things I got no words for. Things that ain't right, that ain't natural, that God never meant for one person to do to another. And it ain't just him. There have been others. 7 others before you came. All bought at auction. All disappeared after the colonel and that devil doctor did their work. Where are they now? Esther's eyes filled with tears. She refused to let fall, buried in the woods past the north field. Marcus knows where. He is the one they make dig the graves. He is the one who has to live with what he has seen, with what he has been forced to help with. It is killing him inside Silas. It is killing all of us. Watching this evil and being powerless to stop it, Silas closed his eyes, feeling the weakness in his body, the ache in his limbs where the incisions throbbed despite the bandages. He had survived the procedure, but 7 others had not. 7 people whose names would never be recorded in any history, whose deaths would never be investigated, whose graves would never be marked unless someone stopped it. The thought was barely formed before exhaustion claimed him, dragging him down into darkness, where he dreamed of the caged man's empty eyes and the sound of shovels breaking earth. 3 days passed in a blur of weakness and fever. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Esther's hands changing his bandages, of bitter medicine forced between his lips, of voices discussing his condition as if he were not present. The incisions in his limbs grew inflamed, showing signs of infection despite Esther's careful tending. On the 4th day, his fever broke, and he woke to find Dr. Rodold standing beside his bed, examining the wounds with clinical detachment. "The infection is responding to treatment," Rodold announced to Thornhill, who stood in the doorway. "He should recover full function within 2 weeks. The blood loss was substantial but not permanently damaging. He will be suitable for a second procedure within 6 weeks." "And Virgilia?" Thornhill asked, showing remarkable improvement. "Her breathing is significantly better. The edema in her ankles has reduced by nearly 40% and she has lost approximately 15 lbs. She was able to climb the stairs to the 2nd floor yesterday, something she has not managed in over a year." Then the procedure was a complete success. Preliminary success, Edmund, we need additional transfers to determine optimal frequency. But yes, the fundamental theory has been proven. Vitality can be successfully transferred from donor to recipient with measurable physiological improvement. They left and Silas understood with cold clarity what he had become. Not a slave but livestock, a renewable resource to be harvested until his body gave out. The door opened again and Celia slipped in carrying soup. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas, you need to get your strength back. You need to be able to move when the time comes. What time? The time when we run. Marcus and I have been planning it for months. We were waiting for the right moment. This is it. They will hunt us down within hours. We are not running south, we are running north. And we have help. People who help slaves escape. They have roots, safe houses. Marcus has been in contact with them for months through a blacksmith in Cahaba. The Underground Railroad, Silas said, understanding. Yes, but we need something from you. We need proof of what happened here. What the Colonel and Dr. Rodold are doing. If we can prove it, document it. Bring evidence north. It could expose these monsters to the world. They will never let us take evidence. Thornhill's journals are locked in his study. But you know what they did. You can describe it, testify to it. And if we can get even one of those journals, one piece of physical evidence, it would corroborate your testimony. Your suffering would mean something, Silas. It would help others. It was compelling, and it appealed to something deeper than survival. The idea that his experience could be weaponized against the institution that had caused such suffering was almost intoxicating. When? He asked. Soon, maybe 2 weeks. They are planning something, a gathering here at the manor. Dr. Rodold mentioned other members of the society would be attending to witness a demonstration. When they are distracted with their guests, when security is focused on the demonstration, that is when we go. What kind of demonstration? Celia's face went pale. Marcus heard them talking. They are bringing another slave, another dwarf, bought at an auction in Montgomery. They are going to perform the procedure again, but this time in front of an audience. They plan to use you and this new slave together. A dual transfer, taking from 2 donors simultaneously. The room seemed to tilt. 2 donors meant twice as much blood loss, twice the trauma, twice the risk. And if the first procedure had brought him to the edge of death, a second one would almost certainly kill him. 2 weeks, he said, I will be ready. But Celia, if we are going to risk everything, we need more than testimony. We need one of those journals or something even better. What could be better? The man in the cage. If we could free him, bring him north as living evidence of what they have done, no one could deny it. A human being mutilated by medical experimentation would be proof that no amount of propaganda could suppress. Celia shook her head frantically. He cannot walk, Silas. He cannot even speak. I do not know how yet, but we have 2 weeks to figure it out. Because you are right. What is happening here is evil. And if we do nothing, if we just run and save ourselves, then 7 people have died for nothing. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Marcus will come tonight. You 2 can plan together, but Silas, be careful. If they suspect anything, they will kill us all. They have too much invested in this work. Too many powerful people supporting them. After she left, Silas forced himself to eat despite nausea. 2 weeks, 14 days to prepare for an escape with minimal chance of success. But even a minimal chance was better than certain death. He thought of the 7 graves in the woods beyond the north field. 7 people whose names he did not know, whose stories would never be told. They deserved better. They deserved to be remembered, to have their deaths mean something. And Silas was going to make sure they did or die trying. 12 days later, Thornhill Manor buzzed with preparation. The Society of Medical Inquiry was sending 7 representatives from across the South. Planters, physicians, and natural philosophers, all wealthy enough to pursue experiments that conventional medicine would condemn and powerful enough to ensure their activities remained hidden. The second slave had arrived 3 days prior. His name, according to the bill of sales, Silas glimpsed, was Abel, 26 years old, 4 tall, described as docile and healthy. He was kept isolated on the 3rd floor, fed well and monitored constantly. Silas caught a glimpse of him once, a young man with a broad face and frightened eyes who looked up at footsteps with an expression that broke Silas's heart. He knew what was coming. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the gathering, Silas found an opportunity he had been waiting for. Thornhill sent him to the study to retrieve a medical text, and for the first time in weeks, the room was unoccupied. Silas moved quickly to the shelves containing the journals. There were dozens of them, leather-bound volumes arranged chronologically. He selected one from 1837, 2 years before his arrival, and flipped through it quickly. The contents made his stomach turn. Page after page of clinical descriptions of procedures performed on slaves whose names were noted only as numbers. Subject 7, Subject 12, Subject 23. Detailed drawings showed incisions, measurements of blood loss, observations of subjects' conditions as they weakened and died. Thornhill had been conducting these experiments for at least 5 years, and the procedures were not all blood transfers. Some involved organ removal, others tested the limits of human pain tolerance. Still others explored what happened when various toxins were administered in increasing doses. It was systematic torture masquerading as medical research happening at Thornhill Manor for years while Dallas County society remained ignorant or deliberately blind. Silas slipped the journal inside his shirt. It was reckless, but he needed to review it properly. Needed to identify the procedures that would be most damning if exposed. He would return it before Thornhill noticed its absence. Back in his room by candlelight, Silas spent hours reading. The entries were methodical, clinical, devoid of any recognition that the subjects were human beings. Thornhill wrote about them the way a farmer might write about livestock. Subject 14 demonstrated remarkable pain tolerance, surviving 68 hours of continuous observation following bilateral renal removal. Subject 19 showed unexpected resistance to mercury poisoning, requiring 3 times the anticipated lethal dose. On and on it went, a catalogue of cruelty. But it was also evidence, undeniable proof written in Thornhill's own hand of crimes that would shock even hardened supporters of slavery. Because while Southern law allowed slaveholders tremendous latitude in disciplining their property, even the most pro-slavery judges recognized limits. What Thornhill documented went far beyond discipline. It was experimentation that served no practical purpose, that advanced no legitimate medical knowledge, that existed only to satisfy sadistic curiosities. Silas copied key passages onto scraps of paper he had scavenged. Memorizing others, he studied the anatomical drawings, understanding for the first time the full scope of what the Society of Medical Inquiry was attempting. They believed they were pioneers, explorers of human biology. They saw themselves as future heroes who would be celebrated once their work bore fruit. Silas saw them as monsters who had convinced themselves that their victims' humanity did not matter. Before dawn, he returned the journal to its place on the shelf, ensuring it was positioned exactly as he had found it. But the information he had copied was now hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his room, ready to be retrieved when they made their escape. Friday brought the arrival of the society members, and with them an atmosphere of carnival excitement that made Silas's skin crawl. The guests arrived throughout the day in expensive carriages. Silas watched from the kitchen window as they greeted Thornhill like brothers, shaking hands and speaking in loud voices about their anticipation for tomorrow's demonstration. He managed to glimpse the guest registry when sent to the study with refreshments. The names recorded there represented power and wealth from across the Deep South. Dr. Samuel Pendergast from Charleston listed as the Society's secretary, Judge Horace Levinson from Mobile, a circuit court judge with political ambitions, Preston Farope, a cotton broker from Savannah, Dr. Elias Grimsley, professor of anatomy at a medical college in Richmond, and 3 wealthy planters from Mississippi and Louisiana, whose names Silas committed to memory. These were not fringe fanatics. These were established men of society, respectable by every conventional measure, who gathered to witness human experimentation they would publicly condemn, but privately funded. Dinner Friday evening was elaborate with Esther and the kitchen staff preparing courses that used up a month's worth of provisions. Silas, required to serve at table alongside Marcus, stood silently while the guests discussed their expectations for the demonstration. "I confess skepticism about the transfusion method," Judge Levinson said, his jowls quivering. "Previous attempts at blood transfer have resulted in universally fatal outcomes. What makes your procedure different, Edmund?" "The purification process," Thornhill replied, gesturing with his wine glass. "Doctor, Untold has developed a method of treating the donor blood to remove individual humoral characteristics while preserving vital essence. The recipient's body accepts it as raw vitality rather than foreign material, and you can demonstrate measurable improvement in the recipient. This from Dr. Grimsley, whose cold eyes suggested he had seen plenty of failed experiments himself. My wife stands as proof. 3 months ago, she could not rise from her chair. Tonight, she joined us at table and managed the stairs without assistance. Her weight has decreased by 40 lb. Her breathing has normalized, and her general vigor has returned, all from a single transfer procedure. Vigilia, seated at the far end of the table, smiled radiantly. She did indeed look transformed from the woman Silas had first seen. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her movements were less labored, and her eyes held a brightness that had been absent before. Remarkable, Preston Fairhope murmured. And tomorrow's demonstration will involve dual donors. Precisely. Our theory suggests that simultaneous transfer from 2 sources will produce even more dramatic results. We will be taking blood from both donors in carefully measured quantities, processing it through the purification apparatus and introducing it to the recipient in controlled stages. The entire procedure should take approximately 3 hours, and the donors survive this. Judge Levinson asked. We anticipate at least one will survive with adequate recovery time. The other may experience complications, but that is an acceptable research outcome. We have additional subjects available should replacements be necessary. The casual discussion of human lives as expendable research materials made Silas's hands shake as he poured wine. Marcus, standing beside him, remained perfectly still, but Silas could feel the tension radiating from him. After dinner, as the guests retired to the drawing room for cigars and brandy, Marcus and Silas found a moment alone in the kitchen. Tomorrow night, Marcus whispered during the demonstration. That is when we go. Abel, Silas said, we cannot leave him. Silas, we cannot save everyone. If we try to free him during the procedure, we will be discovered immediately. Then we do not free him during the procedure. We free him after, when they are distracted by whatever results. The chaos will be our cover. Marcus closed his eyes. You are asking us to risk everything for a man who might already be too damaged to survive the journey. I am asking us to be better than them, to remember that every life matters, even when the law says it does not. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Marcus nodded. Celia has the travel supplies hidden in the smokehouse. The wagon will be waiting 2 miles north on the river road at midnight. We have a 4-hour window before they realize we are gone and start searching. It is not much, but it is all we have. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the horror in Thornhill Manor intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and do not forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let us discover together what happens next. Saturday evening arrived with oppressive humidity that made the air feel solid. The basement laboratory had been prepared for observers with chairs arranged in a semicircle around the 2 examination tables. Additional lamps created a theatrical brightness that made the space feel both clinical and nightmarish. Silas and Abel were brought down separately. Abel was crying silently, tears streaming down his face as Isaiah helped him onto one of the tables. Silas climbed onto his table without assistance, his jaw set, his mind focused on survival and what would come after. The society members filed in, taking their seats with the anticipation of theatergoers awaiting a performance. They carried notebooks and pencils, prepared to document what they witnessed. Dr. Untold, wearing his blood-stained leather apron, explained the procedure in detail, while Thornhill prepared the instruments. Gentlemen, what you're about to witness represents the culmination of decades of research into the nature of human vitality. We will be transferring life force from 2 donors simultaneously to a single recipient, my colleague's wife, who suffers from a degenerative condition that conventional medicine cannot address. He gestured to Vigilia, who had been positioned in a specially designed reclining chair near the tables. She wore a simple white gown, her hair loose, and her expression was one of eager anticipation. The procedure begins with precise incisions at 4 points on each donor, targeting major blood vessels. The blood flows through our purification apparatus, which removes individual characteristics while preserving vital essence. The purified vitality is then introduced to the recipient through controlled transfusion. The entire process is carefully monitored to prevent fatal exsanguination of the donors. "How much blood will you take from each donor?" Grimsley asked, his pencil poised over his notebook. "Approximately 3 punts from each for a total of 6 punts introduced to the recipient. This exceeds the volume taken in the previous successful procedure, but our calculations suggest the recipient can absorb this quantity with dramatic effect. And if the donors cannot survive losing 3 punts," Routledge smiled coldly, "then we will have established the upper limits of sustainable donation, which is valuable data in itself. Science requires sacrifice, gentlemen. That is the nature of progress." The procedure began with brutal efficiency. Routledge made the incisions on both donors simultaneously, working with a speed that spoke of extensive practice. Blood flowed into the glass reservoirs, dark and thick in the lamplight. Abel screamed, a sound that filled the laboratory and made several observers shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Silas bit down on the leather strap they had given him, refusing to make a sound that would give them satisfaction. The pain was worse than the first time because his body was still recovering. Each heartbeat sent agony through his limbs, and the laboratory began to darken at the edges of his vision. He could hear Routledge calling out measurements, hear Thornhill responding with Abel's vital signs, hear the society members murmuring observations and questions. 3 punts. They were taking 3 punts of blood from each of them, and Silas knew with certainty that this was too much. The first procedure had taken him to the edge of death with less volume. This would kill him, kill Abel, kill them both while these men watched and took notes. But then something unexpected happened. As the purified blood began flowing into Vigilia's veins, as her body began absorbing the transferred vitality, she started convulsing. Her back arched, her hands clutched at the chair's armrests, and a sound emerged from her throat that was neither scream nor moan, but something more primal. "Edmund," Routledge shouted, her heart rate. "It is escalating dangerously, 140 beats per minute." Thornhill called out, his voice tight with alarm. 150, 160. "This is tachycardia. We need to stop the transfusion." "Not yet. We are so close to complete transfer." Her body is just adjusting to the increased volume. But Vilia's convulsions worsened. Foam appeared at the corners of her mouth, and her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. The society members were on their feet now, some moving closer for better observation, others backing toward the stairs. "Stop the procedure," Thornhill commanded, abandoning Abel's table to rush to his wife's side. "She is dying, Constance. Stop it now." Routledge finally turned the valves, halting the flow. But the damage was done. Vigilia's body went rigid, every muscle locked in spasm, and then suddenly went limp. The silence that followed was absolute except for Abel's whimpering and the sound of blood still dripping into the reservoirs. Thornhill pressed his fingers to his wife's throat, searching for a pulse. His face went white. No, this cannot be happening. Constance, do something." Routledge moved to examine Vigilia, his hands moving with clinical precision, even as his eyes showed something that might have been panic. Cardiac arrest. The heart could not handle the volume or the intensity of the transfer. "Edmund, I am sorry, but she is gone." The laboratory erupted in chaos. Society members shouted questions, some demanding answers, others already moving toward the stairs, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the failed experiment. Thornhill stood frozen beside his wife's body, his hands shaking, his face a mask of disbelief. In the confusion, no one noticed Marcus and Isaiah moving toward the examination tables. No one saw them quickly bandaging Silas's and Abel's wounds with strips of cloth. No one noticed Celia appearing at the laboratory door with bundles of supplies. Now Marcus hissed, helping Silas off the table. Silas's legs nearly gave out, but Marcus held him up. Isaiah did the same for Abel, who could barely remain conscious. They moved toward a corner of the laboratory that the chaos had left unguarded. Behind a tall cabinet stood a second door, one that led to the tunnel system Silas had learned about during his observations. It was used for moving supplies and presumably for disposing of bodies when experiments went wrong. The tunnel was dark and smelled of earth and decay. Marcus led the way with a single lantern, moving as quickly as the wounded men could manage. Behind them, they could hear shouts from the laboratory, hear Thornhill's voice rising in anguish and rage, He will realize we are gone soon, Celia whispered, supporting Abel on his other side. When he does, they will come after us with dogs and guns. Then we move fast, Marcus said grimly. The tunnel exits near the north field. From there, it is half a mile through the woods to the river road. But Silas stopped, leaning heavily against the tunnel wall. The man in the cage. We cannot leave him. Silas, there is no time. There is always time to choose who we are. Marcus, please. Marcus cursed under his breath, but doubled back toward a side passage. 2 minutes later, he returned supporting a skeletal figure whose eyes stared at nothing. The caged man was lighter than he should have been, his body wasted by months of captivity and experimentation. They emerged from the tunnel into the cool night air, the smell of magnolias almost overwhelming after the basement stench. Behind them, they could hear shouts growing louder. Thornhill had discovered their escape. The journey through the woods was agony. Silas's legs threatened to give out with every step. Abel drifted in and out of consciousness, and the caged man had to be carried. But Marcus knew every path, every hidden trail, and Celia moved with desperate determination. They reached the river road just as bells began ringing at the manor, the alarm being raised. A covered wagon waited in the shadows, driven by a free black man named Josiah, who asked no questions, simply gestured for them to climb in. There is a checkpoint 5 miles north, Josiah said quietly as the wagon lurched forward. We get past that, and we have a chance. You will need to stay absolutely silent. They huddled in the wagon bed, covered by tarps and sacks of grain. Silas felt Abel's labored breathing beside him, felt the caged man's stillness, felt his own consciousness threatening to slip away. He clutched the papers hidden in his shirt, the copied journal entries that proved what had happened at Thornhill Manor. The checkpoint was terrifying. Voices outside, lanterns swinging close, someone asking Josiah about his cargo. But Josiah's papers were in order. His manner was calm, and after long minutes, the wagon rolled forward again. They traveled for 3 days through the underground railroad network, moving from safe house to safe house, always north. Abel regained some strength. The caged man never spoke, but his eyes began to focus to show some awareness of his surroundings. And Silas, despite his weakness, spent hours each night adding to his written testimony, documenting everything he had witnessed. Epilogue. In the autumn of 1841, a pamphlet appeared in Philadelphia titled Medical Atrocities in the Southern States, the testimony of Silas concerning Thornhill Manor. It was published by the American Anti-Slavery Society and distributed throughout the northern states. The pamphlet contained detailed testimony, copied journal entries, and affidavit from 3 escaped slaves describing systematic human experimentation conducted by the Society of Medical Inquiry. The Southern press immediately denounced it as abolitionist propaganda, claiming the testimony was fabricated. But the level of medical detail, the specificity of the names and procedures, and most damning of all, the presence of a living victim, a man whose body bore the scars of the experiments described, made the testimony impossible to completely dismiss. Several northern newspapers sent investigators to Dallas County. They found Thornhill Manor abandoned, the colonel having fled to parts unknown following his wife's death. The basement laboratory had been hastily cleared, but traces remained. More significantly, they found the graves in the woods beyond the north field, 7 unmarked graves containing human remains that showed signs of surgical intervention. The scandal was never fully acknowledged in the South, but the Society of Medical Inquiry quietly dissolved. Several prominent members resigned from public positions. Judge Levinson withdrew from his political race. Dr. Ruddle disappeared, some said to South America, others to Europe. Silas Abel, and the man they had rescued from the cage, reached Canada in December 1841. The caged man, whose real name was Samuel, and who slowly regained the ability to speak, lived for 3 more years before his damaged body finally gave out. But he lived those years as a free man, and his testimony before Canadian abolition societies helped fuel the growing movement against slavery. Silas never stopped writing, never stopped documenting, never stopped speaking about what he had witnessed. His testimony was cited in abolitionist literature for decades, a reminder of what happened when some human beings were granted absolute power over others. The surgical instruments found beneath Thornhill Manor in 1923, 82 years after they were buried, were eventually donated to a medical museum where they remain today. a silent testament to the horrors that occurred in that basement laboratory. The journals that Silas copied from were never recovered, presumably destroyed by Thornhill before his flight. But the story survived. The testimony survived. The memory of 7 people who died as subjects in twisted experiments survived, carried forward by a man who refused to let their suffering be forgotten. This mystery from Dark Diaries exposes a chilling moment where science was perverted by power and prejudice. The story of Thornhill Manor forces us to remember that the most profound horrors are often human-made, born in the shadows of unquestioned authority. What do you believe was the true fate of Conal Thornhill and Dr. Routledge? Could there have been other, similar experiments that were never exposed? Share your theories in the comments below. If these forgotten stories of history's dark corners deserve to be heard, subscribe to Dark Diaries, hit the notification bell, and share this video. The past has many more secrets to reveal, and we'll be here to uncover them, one story at a time.